And Sergeant Johnson is part of a new campaign from military personnel called the Appeal for Redress V2. Sergeant Johnson, thank you so much for taking time to speak with me today.
Thank you for having me.
So, Sergeant, if you could please start out by telling the listeners a little bit about this campaign, Appeal for Redress V2, what it is and how it came about.
So, the Appeal for Redress V2 is service members sending an appeal for redress for the situation that's happening in Gaza to their congressman. It's been written by lawyers and vetted, and it's completely legal and well within your rights as a service member and as well as a citizen. And how it came about was I was inspired by seeing what Larry was doing with his hunger strike in DC. I
Mhm.
reached out to him and we just talked about trying to get a way to get service members to come together and collectively put our voices together and go against what's happening in Gaza. And we got in contact with the Organization Veterans for Peace. And they've had experience with something like this before with an appeal for redress, actually. And I want to say during the Afghanistan war. And so we created another version, and that's the appeal for redress too. And it has 5 different letters on there that you can choose from with different tones, and you can put as much information about yourself as you want or as little and send it directly to your congressman. And then Veterans for Peace will collect all the letters just to know how many were sent.
Mhm. And so, what specifically is the Appeal for Redress asking Congress to do?
The appeal for redress is specifically asking Congress to follow international law and the laws that we've already agreed to that we are breaking by helping Israel in the genocide.
Can you talk a little bit about how it came about that you had this consciousness and you know wanted to be part of this?
So, and a lot of service members feel this way too. I do speak for myself, but I'm talking to other people. My emotions are not alone in this, but I didn't enlist to like do heinous war crimes. I enlisted to protect people. I enlisted to help people, and with the situation in Gaza, I feel like I'm being forced to be complicit in absolute humanitarian atrocities, and so that's what really started it. Is that I felt like I don't even have a choice to be somewhat complicit in what was happening there. And I had already been to protests, and I was following the BDS movement, and I was boycotting and protesting, and none of it was really feeling like enough. I had personally already written letters to my congressman, and I felt like I was hitting a wall, and I didn't know what else I could do. And so, getting with Larry and creating the appeal for redress, I thought it was just another way to at least try to let our government know how we feel.
Right. So it sounds like you had opposition to what was happening in Gaza fairly early on in, since October 7th when things really escalated.
Right, and especially for my job, we were kind of keeping close eyes on everything, and so
Mhm.
I had oppositions to what was going on since probably October 8th.
Mm. Can you talk a little bit about, because I guess, I mean, war is never a pretty thing. And I think about the folks that I know that served in Iraq or in Afghanistan, and then because of those experiences, also joined organizations like Veterans for Peace or About Face, another organization that military members are involved in. Was there something about this particular situation that touched you more than, that really touched you?
Right, I guess this one was the target of the war. So I understand how wars are fought. I understand wars are not pretty. I understand the idea behind collateral damage. But if I wanted to attack somebody in a residential building and I blew up the residential building, my target was the residents. It wasn't the person in the residential building. We've had years and years of like special operations troops and stuff like that. People who are trained to go into these areas and fight people and or take high value targets in these situations, that's not being used at all.
Mhm.
It's just it's almost like Hamas, not even almost. I genuinely Hamas might be more of an excuse to just continue to fight a civilian population, and the numbers really do back that up. I guess that was the situation for me, and then in the Afghanistan and Iraq war, I didn't know a lot about wars, so I really only knew what I knew from the media. But this one, I saw it from start to finish, and I'm seeing everything that's happening. This is not. There's no doctrine that says this is how war's supposed to be fought. No doctrine that we support, and it's impossible to agree with it, in my opinion. It's also impossible to look at it as a war against the Israeli army and a war against Hamas, especially with how they're fighting it. If they wanted to take out Hamas, you could use ground like their Israeli army is just so much more powerful. The I can't even say Palestinian army. There's not one. It's so much more powerful than Hamas. You don't have to drop 2,000-pound bombs on the country over and on that small strip of land. You're going to hit Hamas by accident at that point. You're just going to blow up civilians and blow up the country.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think some of the Israeli leaders have said the quiet part out loud and kind of saying that they're really their intention is to get rid of all the Palestinians. And
Several times they said they want to level Gaza and this, that, and the third. It's impossible to watch all of that and then still think Hamas is even a factor in this.
right. One technique that's used frequently by the US military is to dehumanize the population that's being targeted in a way that I guess makes it more palatable for people to accept the attacks on those populations. We've seen that in the media here with the way they talk about Palestinians sometimes and the false stories that come out against them. But is that something that is do you feel like that's working at all in this situation, or are people seeing through that?
I think for some people it is working, but for a lot of people, I don't think it. I think that it's worked a lot throughout history, but we're really in like an information era, societally. I can go on my phone and I can look up how the U.S. has done this exact same thing, copy and paste it from Vietnam, from Afghanistan, and so on and so forth. And I can just see that it's just not true. And then also they could say these things about the Palestinians. This is the first time in history that I'm watching the Palestinians die on my screen in on live, like in real time.
Mhm.
And I'm seeing that it's not true. They're not animals or anything like that, and they're absolutely regular people. And this is also an insane time for like fact checking. And I think by the end of October, I had already read a few books on because I wasn't versed in the Israeli Palestine situation at all, and or I was like very, very, very surface level knowledge of it. By the end of October, because of the internet, I had already read a few books that were recommended by professors. I had found Norman Finkelstein and read almost all of his videos online, and I was just pretty knowledgeable in the situation in the span of a month. That opportunity hasn't really been out there throughout history. So lying about like the civilian population in Vietnam or Afghanistan used to be a lot. But that was just a strategy that would really work. But now I don't think that it's a viable strategy anymore. And I think that a lot of people are seeing to it. Um, I live pretty close to DC, and I think this year alone we've had the two biggest protests in American history over this situation.
Yeah. The resistance that's showing up across the United States, around the world, it is a really amazing moment of solidarity and a people taking different approaches, going after the weapons suppliers, going after people who are running for office, just being out in the streets. It's been a pretty tremendous resistance that we're seeing.
Right. It's all inspiring.
Yeah. So you mentioned Larry Aber, who was on hunger strike, and I interviewed him a few months ago on this program. There was also, I think, Aaron Bushnell, self-immolating in front of the Israeli embassy was another event that seemed to touch people. Did that have an impact, or can you talk a little bit about the folks around you? Did you feel like you were an outlier? Were there people with similar feelings?
The Aaron Bushnell, when he self-immolated, I no longer could see my coworkers. I haven't seen them the same since because no one talked about it in the office, and I watched the whole thing, and it's not like they didn't know about it. It's hard to even put into words. I was like, I was like, guys, like we're talking about whatever we were talking about that day. I'm like, an airman burned himself in front of the Israeli embassy, and they're like, "Oh, he was probably crazy, this, that, and the third." And I was like, "How are we so quick to say that?" And did you like hear his words? I don't think he was crazy at all, and I just haven't been able to see you then the same. Then I had people come up to me in private, going, "Hey, man, I agree with you, this, that, and the third, but there's nothing that we could do about it." And I think that part irritates me even more. So like, there's absolutely is something we can do about it. I just don't think there's anything we can do about it. Like as individuals, if one person, I don't think it's going to change the world, but together, I think we can make a big difference.
Yeah. You mentioned kind of needing to consult lawyers in this campaign, the Appeal for Redress V2. Can you talk a little bit about what the rights are for people who are in the military in terms of being able to engage politically, or the rights or restrictions on that?
Most of the restrictions are just not speaking for the military. You're definitely not allowed to speak for the military. You're not allowed to unionize. So, which is why Veterans for Peace crafted this whole thing. They're not current military, so it's not unionizing. You are allowed your constitutional rights, and in there is an appeal for redress of like actions with the government. So you are allowed to do that. Even though you're legally covered, your units may or may not still retaliate in some way, shape, or form. Some people have experienced in the past, like their units are just really hard on them, like, hey, you were like 2 minutes late to here, we're gonna count you for this, or just like little things like that after they know that what their stances are on certain things. But legally you'll be covered.
So, for folks who are thinking about joining the Appeal for Redress V2, what is your advice to them?
Well, one, I 100% think every service member that joined for moral reasons absolutely should send a letter from the appeal for redress too. And you don't have to, if you're scared of retaliation, you don't have to put your name or anything on there. You just could put rank, last name. Like I said, I wrote my letter out and I just put Sergeant Johnson and I put my zip code. They were going to have an insanely hard time finding a Sergeant Johnson. It's a super duper common name. Or I didn't even have to put my name. I could have just put Sergeant U.S. Army. So that's my advice for people who are nervous about retaliation. Just put rank, last name, or if you have a super specific last name, maybe just put rank and branch and just send it out. But please, our voices in this matter are too important not to let them be heard. So as service members in this specific conflict, our voices hold more weight than the average citizen right now.
Mhm. And if somebody does join the campaign and they start to face retaliation, that's a violation of their rights. Do they have recourse, or are there places they can go to, or people they can talk to?
I would say they absolutely should reach out to Veterans for Peace. There are lawyers that have told us anyone that's facing retaliation, please reach out to them because just as the same way we can be punished on the UCMJ, your command can also be punished under that same UCMJ. They are not allowed to attack you. They're not allowed to retaliate. So if they're doing that, don't be scared of them. Right, the same law that punishes you punishes them. So I would reach out to Veterans for Peace, talk to the lawyers, and see what you can do.
Right. Now it sounds like another one of the groups involved in this campaign is the Center for Conscience and War, and they're reporting that more and more people are reaching out to them to get conscientious objector status. Is that something that you've considered? Is that something that you're seeing as well?
I've absolutely considered it, and my line has been the second my mission or my unit is involved in what's happening, I was going to seek conscientious objector status. And so far that hasn't happened, but that's still where I draw my line in the sand.
Right. Right. Well, it sounds like there is some involvement of the U.S. military. I mean, there certainly was the pier that was built, and when the attack, the massacre in Nusret happened, when the Israeli occupying forces went in to try to retrieve some hostages, but ended up killing hundreds of Palestinians. It sounds like the pier was used, or maybe some of the U.S. military were used in that. Are you seeing some U.S. direct involvement in this?
As as far as U.S. direct involvement, I don't know anything outside of what's been put on the media.
But is there, I guess, with what we're seeing is the Yemenis who are under the Genocide Convention have been taking action to blockade supplies from getting to Israel, and now the some of the Iraqi resistance forces have joined them in that, as well as some of the Iraqi resistance has launched attacks into Israel, targeting ports and things like that. We know that Hezbollah in Lebanon has been, attacking Israel, and it sounds like Israel may be moving more of its military north, as that might turn into a broader conflict. Iran has already put out that if there's a war with Lebanon, that they'll be, involved in that, as well as other members of what's called the Axis of Resistance, which is like Yemen, Iraq, Syria, and others. Is there a concern that this could turn into a larger regional war, that then U.S. military members might be called up to participate directly in that?
So I'm definitely not high enough to know officially if that's like something we're moving towards, but socially, people are concerned about that, and that's even one of the things that we drafted in the letters. It's growing to, even if you're just like a super patriotic guy, maybe you're not as passionate about the situation in Gaza. You're probably still passionate about American soldiers, and it's growing to the point that there absolutely is a chance that we are going to have our physical soldiers over there dying over this. Yeah, it's like you just said with the acts of resistance and the strikes on Lebanon are continuing and growing. Like it's 100% is growing into a much broader conflict than just Israel and Palestine.
Right, right. And I mean, the U.S. and the U.K. have been bombing Yemen, the country of Yemen as well. Um, so, and I guess there's the Navy. I was reading just the other day that one of the U.S. naval ships that was in the Red Sea was saying that they haven't seen this kind of, conflict since World War II, and that the U.S. is using, $1 million missiles to shoot down Yemeni drones. I'm sure that's a concern for folks in the military too, kind of the conflict that's happening right there.
Yeah, it's definitely an unsettling feeling for a lot of service members that so many different parties are seen to get involved, and the fact that Israel doesn't seem to be slowing down with who it attacks and how we're kind of treating Yemen right now. It's definitely an unsettling feeling, and it looks like it could easily progress into a much larger conflict.
Yeah. And of course, that means more resources from the US going into military, while we have so many needs here at home for, basic needs that people we could be using that money for to provide housing or healthcare or things that people need here at home. So what kind of response are you aware of, how much of a response there has been for this campaign, Appeal for Redress V2? Is it reaching military members? Are they writing to Congress?
Right now, I know personally a few people that have taken it and have written their congressman, but I don't know, I guess, large scale how many military members this has reached. Better for Peace has been pushing it out, but I don't know how far that reach has gone.
Right. And how can people, where do they go to get information about the campaign?
they can go straight to veteransforpeace.com. It'll be front page.
Right, right.
Sorry, veteransforpeace.org.
.org, right. I was also wondering if you had any thoughts about Julian Assange and the fact that he was recently released.
When I saw that he was recently released, I didn't know that that's who had created WikiLeaks, so I had to kind of do a lot of back research. I mean, my personal beliefs, I just thought he was a hero. I thought what he did was very heroic, and it kind of put into perspective how long have people been trying to fight these type of atrocities and trying to shed light on what's been happening, fighting and protesting and boycotting and everything like that. I was just looking at his work and I was like, man, this has been going on for a while.
When WikiLeaks first came out, we were pretty excited about it because it was a huge tool for people to get information that the media, the corporate media, would prevent people from having. Well, do you have any final words or thoughts on what's going on or messages for folks, how they can support the campaign?
I think, especially when I'm talking to service members, regardless of your branch, it took bravery to leave your home and go into the military. Whatever job you have, I know requires some sort of courage or integrity or moral courage and bravery. Just remember that and use that now for the appeal for redress. Your country is not you. You don't have to be complicit in what's going on. And even if you're seeing all this and you're sick to your stomach and you want to become a conscious objector, you can also reach out for Veterans for Peace and they'll help you down that route as well. For all service members with any moralness, any integrity, I genuinely think that you should. I genuinely think it's our moral duty, even, and our moral obligation to do something about this.